My name is Boyden Gray, and I am the U.S. representative here in Brussels to the EU. And I have as one of my assignments dealing with environment and climate change. And I really want to try to use this opportunity to set the record straight that the United States is emphatically serious about this issue. And we don't get this across in either the United States, in our own country, or here. And so that's perhaps something I can help correct. The problem with it was it did not cover the developing countries, which are going to be, in fact, China already is the largest emitter of CO2. And without these emerging economies, some of which are quite rich, like China, we simply can't make any progress. In our Clinton administration, the Democratic administration, the Senate voted, our Senate, 95-0 against the Kyoto Treaty. So this is not a Republican George Bush a predilection. This is not some hidden agenda for Republicans. This is a bipartisan issue. We had one U.S. Senator come to Bali for a part of this new climate treaty negotiation, Senator Kerry, nominee of the Democratic Party last election, and he said to everyone there in Bali, you have to understand that if China is not in this agreement, you can count the U.S. out. It's these advanced developing countries. We don't expect Papua New Guinea to take any kind of economic sacrifice or hit. In fact, we hope that no one does if we can get the technology developed. But we must have China, which is now the biggest emitter, engaged. We must have India, which will be the third biggest emitter in 2050. Europe will be almost irrelevant in 2050 in terms of where the trends are going, in terms of how they contribute to this problem. If we don't have China and the developing countries involved, the fact that we take commitments and Europe take commitments will be irrelevant. Well, we've been working very, very hard through what we call the MEM process. MEM stands for Major Economies Meeting, MEM. This MEM process involves the 16 largest emitters. The idea is to form a subcommittee of the UN process to get the biggest problems together in the room to try to work out the rough outlines of how a deal might be accomplished. You cannot negotiate anything useful with 190 countries sitting around a football stadium. But if you can get 16 or 17 people around a table the size of the room I'm sitting in, you can actually make progress. The Europeans, I think, have found this very useful. The developing countries, I think, have found this very useful. This is something we pioneered. We made very clear that we will endorse such a treaty if the advanced developing, the rich developing countries are also included. They do not have to accept the same level of reduction that we are going to agree to, but they have to be able to agree to some level of reduction. Otherwise, and no agreement will pass our Democratic Senate. It doesn't matter whether our Senate and our House is Republican, Democratic. If China is not included, they will not adopt it. I think the central misperception is that the U.S. favors only voluntary targets and has continued to oppose mandatory limits. And all I can say is we have mandatory limits in 8 sectors of our economy, which covers virtually the entire area of commercial activity in the United States, including the incandescent light bulb, which will not be very long for this world, at least in the U.S. Actually, I should point out that the United States has already taken some major mandates that are now U.S. law, more aggressive than what the EU has actually adopted so far. So we actually have, as U.S. law, very, very stringent reductions in CO2 for automobiles, for biofuels, for energy efficiency appliances, for the incandescent light bulb, which we are getting rid of. This is something Europe hasn't yet done. So we are well along the road towards getting a grip on this. And as I say, with the research that we're doing and funding in both the private sector and by governments, we are going to have the answers to this in the next generation. but we still need China's cooperation. Well, that's a really, I think, unfortunate misconception. President Bush, sometimes we refer to him as 43. The current President Bush made his fortune actually in baseball. And my guess is that if he is to go back into business, it will be back into baseball, not into the oil business. You know, he was a pioneer for alternative fuels during this current administration. It's really the President's idea to do the 30 by 30, which is 30% gasoline displacement with alternative fuels by 2030. That is his project announced 2 years ago in the State of the Union. Well, I'm sure every president worries about his legacy, but this goes back more years than I'm able to impress in this interview. The president's State of the Union 2.5 years ago was the major breakthrough in a sense where he declared the need to get off of fossil fuels, and that was the critical switch, if you will, in U.S. policy. And he has led the U.S. government into this very, very dramatic legislation that was signed last December. Since Kyoto was signed, in the last 10 years that is, we've done about the same as Europe, with an economy that's grown faster, that is in terms of containing greenhouse gases from the signing of Kyoto going forward. So we have nothing to be embarrassed about in the United States, and we should be working more closely with Europe to try to engage the really big emitters who are China, India, and the advanced developing countries, many of which aren't really poor. Well, I think we've broken the back of this in the last 6 to 9 months with our major economies process, broken the back, that is, of the inability to work closely together. I think we are now actually achieving this. The press hasn't really caught up with it, but that really is my point, that we must work together, which we are, I think, now effectively doing, but we must be doing that, and we must be seen to be doing that by the press in order to reach a conclusion in Copenhagen at the end of 2009.